form of disturbance. This is a meeting held in public. It's not a public meeting. Can I just, before we get into the meat of the matter, introduce the officers in front of me? And if one of you could put a microphone on, please, the camera will get on to you. First of all, we have Lewis Jones, legal man. Then we have Jeanette Walsh, Development Control Manager. We have Catherine Pearson, the Senior Planning Officer and Case Officer for this event, and Elizabeth Sims, Head of Planning, sitting on the far left, or my left. Moving on to the items. Emma, minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of November. Is it your wish I sign those as a true record? Agreed. Emma, apologies for absence and declarations of substitutions.
We have apologies from councillors Pat Frost, John Ward and Dennis Lee. No substitutes.
Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest prior to the meeting, Emma?
None before the meeting.
Thank you. Nothing else. Emma, questions from members of the public? Have we had any?
None received.
Right. Item 5, application for planning permission, item A1, land between Downs Link and the rear of 120 to 132 Horsham Road, Cranley. The erection of 119 dwellings along with amenity space, associated landscaping and parking with access from the Horsham Road. And the officers, Jeanette Walsh and Catherine Pearson, to introduce. All yours.
Thank you, Chairman. This application seeks full planning permission for 119 homes on land to the west of Horsham Road, 36 of which would be affordable homes, so that equates to 30% of the 119 in total. The application site is outlined in red here. The site to the north in blue is phase 1 of the Horsham Road development, which has previously been granted planning permission for 149 homes and is currently being built out. The proposal before members this evening would follow the general pattern of development approved for phase 1, with the main central access road looping through the development here, with a series of smaller estate roads leading off. The site would be peppered with green open spaces, including 4 laps, which on this plan are highlighted as the pink circles, a leap, which is an equipped area of play along the tree belt to the northern boundary here. For ease of reference for members who attended the site visit this morning, we walked through from phase 1 at this point here. In terms of access, the proposal would link into the road network for phase 1, continuing the loop around, and would utilise the existing access constructed onto the Horsham Road. This application would, however, provide a separate pedestrian link to the northeastern part of the site through to the Horsham Road. This diagram shows that link, so the southeastern extent of development here, passing through an existing unmade track up to the Horsham Road here. The track would be 3 metres wide and would feature a kissing gate arrangement here, so as it could only be used for pedestrian or cycle access. The existing bus stop on the Horsham Road, on the northbound carriageway heading into Cranley, would be relocated adjacent to where the footpath would terminate at Horsham Road. The distance of the bus stop to the furthest most plot within the site would be approximately 625 metres away. There would also be a new 30 mile per hour gateway feature here, as people approached into Cranley, obviously before meeting the junction, which is further to the north here on the Horsham Road shown off the plan. Adjacent to this pedestrian link is a small area of ancient woodland. The woodland is within the private curtilage of a dwelling, and none of the trees are within 1 metre of the fence line. No trees in that area are proposed to be removed, and it is proposed to use a no-dig construction for the pedestrian link, the hard surface for the bus stop, and any works to the culvert on the Horsham Road to ensure that none of the routes are disturbed. The site's boundaries are fairly well treed. The proposal would predominantly retain the existing belt of trees on the northern boundary with phase 1, save for 4 oak trees which would be removed to allow the estate road to be punched through in the middle of that belt. These oak trees are the subject of group TPO, and the tree officer has confirmed that they would be removed from that group TPO. A further prominent oak, which is located in this position adjacent to the existing copse, would also be removed. This tree has been subject of extensive damage caused by a lightning strike and is not considered to be worthy of retention. It's not included in any group TPO. In addition, the existing thicket here, which separates the site from the properties fronting onto the Horsham Road, would also be thinned and reduced. This area doesn't contain any trees that are of any public amenity space, public amenity value, beg your pardon. I would just like to draw your attention to drainage for the site. Unfortunately, I don't have a drainage plan because it's so large and so detailed it wouldn't have reproduced that well in the presentation, but hopefully the information I give you now will provide you with sufficient details. With regards to surface water, the proposal includes a mix of attenuation ponds, underground storage tanks and infiltration through permeable paving. Surface water from the western pond, I'll just bring up the site plan. So this attenuation pond here would be released at a rate of 14 litres per second into the phase 1 underground network, which discharges into the brook along the northern boundary of phase 1. Discharge from the second pond here would discharge at a rate of 16.5 litres per second directly into the culverted watercourse which crosses the site, and again which also eventually terminates at the Holdhurst Brook along the northern boundary. The flow would be controlled by hydro brake, and discharge rates would be restricted to greenfield runoff rates. The lead local flood authority is satisfied in that respect that the SUD scheme is acceptable and there will not be an increase in surface water flooding locally. With regards to waste water, the proposal is to connect again into the phase 1 development, which contains a pumping station and hydro brake. The applicant has entered into detailed discussions with Thames Water, which has now issued its consent to connect to the public sewer. There's sufficient capacity in the public sewer to connect. Should wastewater levels rise to a critical point in the public sewer, the pump on phase 1 would be inhibited and no further sewage would be released until those levels subside. In those instances, Thames Water is satisfied that the storage capacity of 104 cubic metres would exceed the required capacity of 88 cubic metres to serve both phase 1, which is under construction, and phase 2, which is before members this evening. Just take you back to the street scenes. These are just to give you an indication of the size and style of the dwellings proposed. As mentioned at the start of the presentation, this is a full planning application, so the matters of access, appearance, landscaping, scale and layout are to be considered. The proposal would include a mix of predominantly detached and semi-detached dwellings with some small apartment blocks, some of which would have the appearance of a small terrace of dwellings. The proposal would have a density of 18 dwellings per hectare. Corresponding densities in the area are between 4.2 and 17.5 dwellings per hectare. The buildings would be 2 stories in height and would feature a vernacular palette of materials with varied roof forms to add richness and variety to the street scene. 36 affordable homes would be provided, which would be designed to be tenure blind and peppered throughout the development in small clusters. Parking would be provided for each dwelling in line with the council's parking guidelines, as well as 37 additional parking bays which would be sited along the roadways. I'll just take members through a couple of site photos just to sort of give you an idea of some of the key areas. This is a view from the western extent of the site, so on the left-hand side of the picture you can just see the construction works for phase 1 happening. In the middle is the existing copse, which would largely be retained, and the southern boundary here. So that is looking along the site towards the Horsham Road. This is the, sorry, I think it should be southeastern corner, beg your pardon. This is where the link through to the Horsham Road, the pedestrian link, would go. And this is the existing track, which obviously requires to be upgraded to make it accessible and usable for pedestrians and cyclists. Before we move on to the determining issues, if I can just draw your attention to the printed update sheet. There are a couple of amendments there to note at the top, and there are some amendments to conditions. I won't take members through those. In essence, they've come about after sort of discussing further the conditions and refining them. There's nothing in there that would really alter the overall thrust of the conditions. This evening, the matters on which members are being asked to exercise their judgment on the right-hand side are the impact on the countryside beyond the green belt in terms of landscape character, the design and visual impact of the development, so those are the matters before you, and the impact on residential amenity, both for existing residents along the Horsham Road and, of course, future residents. The recommendation is therefore as set out on the update sheet that, subject to those matters, permission be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Now we move on to public speaking, and Councillor Brown-Freestone isn't here, so moving straight on then to the supporter of the scheme, Joanna Pritchard and Charlie Cooper. Right, I understand you're going to share the presentation. You have 4 minutes, and when you start speaking.
Thank you. Chair, thank you for allowing us to address the committee this evening. My name is Joanne Pritchard, a town planner from Savills. I'm joined by Charlie Cooper, the appointed drainage engineer from Ardent. As you heard in the officer's presentation, the proposed development in front of you today is phase 2 of the emerging housing allocation at Horsham Road, with phase 1 currently under construction. The committee report prepared by officers is very thorough and sets out all the pertinent issues relating to this full detailed planning application. Phase 2 of the development has been designed to create a cohesive scheme across the 2 phases, both in terms of layout and housing provision. It provides an integrated landscaping scheme of open space and ecology corridors which connect to the first phase. There is also a comprehensive drainage strategy that covers both phases. Phase 2 includes a greater proportion of smaller units than at phase 1 to help promote mixed and balanced communities. Phase 2 also offers 36 affordable homes in a range of sizes to help meet the needs of both individuals and families within the borough. All properties are designed to reflect the Cranley vernacular and will use the same palette materials of Phase 1. Crest Nicholson's consultancy team have worked closely with officers and with their consultees to bring this scheme forward to you today. I'll now pass over to Charlie to talk to you more about drainage.
Thank you, Joanne. The site is located in flood zone 1 and is considered to be at low risk of flooding, and therefore the flood risk assessment has focused on ensuring that the surface and foul water flows from the proposed development would not increase flood risk to the surrounding area. The surface water drainage follows the same principles as the Phase 1 development. The proposed development uses SUDs in the form of 2 strategic attenuation basins, as well as permanent paving and attenuation tanks to capture surface water runoff and release it at a controlled rate. Surface water will be split into 2 catchments, with the western part of the site discharging into the Phase 1 underground drainage network, and the eastern catchment draining directly into an on-site ditch, which eventually joins the Holdhurst Brook. The discharge rate from the development will be less than or equal to the pre-development runoff rates. As for Phase 1, the pipe drainage network will be adopted by Thames Water, and the SUDS features will be maintained by a private management company who will also be responsible for maintaining the landscaped areas and private roads within the development. Surrey County Council, as the lead local flood authority, have reviewed the proposals and recommended the application for approval. The foul drainage will drain to the pumping station, which is currently located within the Phase 1 development, and this discharges the existing sewer network in Horsham Road. The Phase 1 pumping station was designed with sufficient capacity to manage flows from both of the phases. An additional foul storage has been provided at the pumping station to store the foul water during peak demand events prior to being slowly released back into the network. The pumping station and foul sewage network will be adopted and maintained by Thames Water. And the pumping station will be monitored by a telemetry system to alert Thames Water to any problems that may occur with the pump operation. Thames Water have raised no objections to the planning application, and furthermore, the detailed design for the pumping station has now been completed and are reviewed and approved by Thames Water. Thank you.
Thank you both very much indeed. Moving on, just a quick reminder that the site that we're talking about is a strategic site under the Waverley local plan. So now turning to Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarity, I'm speaking as a ward member for Cranley West, not a member of this committee, and I don't have any vote. I'm also a member of the Cranley Parish Council Planning Committee and an ordinary member of Cranley Civic Society. Once again, I'm really saddened to see that we are faced with houses being built in Cranley that do not meet the technical housing space standards. We should be able to do better. I cannot help but feel that the submission of this application to this committee is premature. How can members possibly agree this full planning application when details of the Thames Water agreement between Thames Water and the developers is not available lodged against the application? Thames Water have said in their reports that there would be detrimental effect on the sewage network and that sewage flooding will occur from this development. There is absolutely nothing that I have seen against the application that outlines what the solution is going to be. The latest flood risk assessment in November 2017, Appendix D, point 5.1.3, outlines the need for a foul system of improvement works, but within that paragraph they do confirm that they haven't got confirmation yet whether or not it's actually feasible to do it. In this point, they also mention the requirement for a detailed design. We really need sight of this detailed design before planning could be granted on this site for what is a significant number of new homes. I was absolutely horrified to see, referred to again in Thames Water's email of the 20th of September 2017, that they were referring to the previously presented options that were presented on Phase 1 for foul water retention on the site. I think members might remember this. It included on option 1 a huge tank for sewage on the site to store 821 metres cubed, or option 2, an off-site provision, which was Snoxall Field, which is obviously land owned by the parish council. Members were very much against this option previously. How can members consider this application without the fundamental details of how the sewage is going to be dealt with on this site, particularly when the options still being proposed have been so unacceptable and perhaps even unachievable? Adding a Grampian condition that has little teeth to cover this basic requirement, which is and also based on scant information, is simply not satisfactory. The Section 106 agreement mentions work to the sports pitches and a mugger, possibly again on Snoxhill. The parish council members have not been consulted on this. The proposed roadworks within the Section 106 at the junction of the Ewhurst and the Horsham roads make no mention of the detrimental effect on the Arts Centre, a notable building in Cranley and part of the conservation area. Once again, there's been no consultation with parish council members. Furthermore, I would really request members, if they are minded to approve this application, to ensure that specific drawing numbers for the SUDS design and for the finished ground levels are included in any conditions, as without these there seems to be no control over the eventual height of the development, and existing residents will continue to suffer the overbearing nature of this site, as has happened on the northern boundary of Phase 1, where the land has been built up not to approximately 1 metre, as stated in the officer's report, but to 2 metres. This has a significant effect on residential amenity. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and if possible, I would like to come back later if I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis, Patricia Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. My colleague, my fellow ward member, has spoken very well about the issues relating to sewage and water, so I won't go into that again, but I totally concur with everything that she said. I do, however, object to this application for a number of reasons. Firstly, I am concerned that there is just one access to the site, which is through Phase 1 that is currently under development, and the number of properties will be accessed via the one entrance is 268, and not just the 119 dwellings referred to in this application. It should be noted that the Hitherwood Nightingale's estate serves around 300 properties and has 3 vehicular access points. There is poor visibility along the main road from the junction, and I anticipate that there will be considerable delays and frustration experienced by motorists as they seek to access the Horsham Road. Although some motorists will turn away from the village, there is no doubt that this development will further impact on the already very heavy traffic flow into and through the village. Another issue is that there are very few opportunities for employment locally, and the majority of new residents will be trying to leave the village for work, creating even more traffic and delays. The infrastructure of Cranley is already under severe strain, and despite all of the supposedly comforting words from developers and the utility companies, I have my doubts that the problems, many of which already exist, but could be made worse by this development, will be properly addressed. With respect to flooding, a number of trees that take up vast quantities of water will sadly be felled on what is often a waterlogged site. And I am deeply concerned for existing properties in the Hitherwood Nightingales area that have in the recent past experienced major flooding issues. In another area of this site, the reduction in the trees will reduce the privacy of existing properties and cause overlooking. The development will increase light and noise pollution and increasingly urbanize the whole of the area. I have looked at the update sheet and I have to express some concerns about condition 14. It may be properly addressed elsewhere, but I do feel it's absolutely essential that we properly address the issue of the proposed private management scheme for the site for as long as the site exists. If this application is permitted, it will change the landscape of Cranley forever and adversely impact on the quality of life of existing residents, and we do have a duty to protect them as well. It is probably not a planning consideration, but I have to say that I am truly saddened by this application for further development on this greenfield site that was always very beautiful in all seasons and much loved by us all. The residents of Cranley, who are real people and real families, should be treated with fairness, respect and consideration. They are already in the situation of having to absorb far more than their fair share of development with the resulting changes to the nature of the community. I believe enough is enough, and I ask that you reject the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillors. Brings us to the committee. All yours. Councillor Denis.
Thank you. I did wait to see whether somebody wanted to speak before me, but they weren't. So thank you to the ward member and Councillor Ellis. I agree with many of their points about it being the countryside beyond the green belt. There's a couple of points which I just want to touch on. And my apologies, I can't give you accurate page numbers because my computer crashed, and of course they don't always quite tally up. So, but it talks about car parking, and except there's 69 garages. But then it talks about under provision of car parking for 3-bedroom houses, and it almost seems like they're going to have to park wherever they can park, or use the visitors' bays. And I think that was quite disappointing because there is quite a high percentage of 3-bedroom premises. Looking at the comments, I mean, Cranley object. Page 26 on the paper document, there's a section from Surrey Police. And in the past, we don't normally get too many words from Surrey Police. But again, having read the comments, I can't really see what they've done with the comments and their sort of recommendations. We go to them as statutory partners, but people are supposed to be experts in those fields. But I couldn't really see that translating into a condition. And, you know, if I've missed it, my apologies. We talked just a few minutes ago about the management company and SUDS, and I think Councillor Ellis said it might be covered in condition 14. But from my memory, reading the papers in full, it talks about landscaping, maintaining a car parking, I think it said, and I can't see where that's actually covered within those conditions. Condition 14 seems to cover SUDS, but everything else seems to have fallen off. So again, if it is covered and I've missed it, please, you know, I accept my apologies on that one. I have to admit, both my previous two colleague speakers talk about Thames Water, and when I read page 26, and I think a fairly damning comment saying that you know, there'd be detrimental effects caused to the sewage network, I have absolutely no confidence, because I haven't seen anything, that the sewage is actually going to work. And I think it's really disappointing if there is documents in existence, why we haven't seen them. We know Cranley's experienced a lot of sewage problems. We know a lot of residents have had sewage coming into their houses, and I can only imagine the effect on them. And we've been asked to sign off a full application with absolutely no knowledge on how this is going to work. And I think that's really, really disappointing. And at the moment, I'm not convinced I can support this with that lack of information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I just wonder if either Lewis Jones or the officers want to come back at that point on the 106 agreement on the SUDs and maintenance.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so the 106 agreement, condition 14, would essentially duplicate a provision for the section 106. So we would tie up the operation of the system for the lifetime of the development in the section 106, which is actually a stronger tie than a condition would be able to provide. And the other matters relating to management of public open spaces, etc., are also covered in the section 106 agreement. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Jeanette?
Councillors, in relation to the issue with respect to the comments from Thames Water, if you turn to page 73 of your agenda papers, you'll see the issue of flooding and drainage is covered. Thames Water have confirmed that they have granted approval in principle for, sorry, I'm just getting the section, councillors. Sorry, it's page 75, that they have granted consent in principle for the adoption of the public sewer and consent in principle for the connection to the public sewer. That information is actually on the planning application. It's on the website as well. So the comments at page 26 were early discussions with Thames Water. They have confirmed for us that they have agreed these matters in principle.
Thank you, Jeanette. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions for the officers. Can I be quite clear that in relation to condition 14, which has been amended, there is an undertaking by the developer to maintain the SUDs in perpetuity?
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And given that Thames Water have given their consent in principle, what protection do we have if there should be some later change in that position, if the practical difficulties of implementing an adequate foul drainage system come to light? Will we be informed? Will it halt the development if they do that? Or is this meant to be the precursor in fairly short order to a confirmed plan showing how the site has capacity?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Mulliner, condition 11 on page 95, that requires the submission of the details of that strategy. So we've got the agreement in principle and the details will come through the condition. So that would be enforceable as a planning condition. The statutory undertaker would also have a responsibility in ensuring that that is fit for purpose and is maintained as such in the lifetime of the development. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. And lastly, I should merely comment that I do sympathise with Councillor Ellis's comment about the single access. This does seem to be a bit of a trap, should anything happen, perhaps because of frustrated motorists colliding out at the single point of exit and perhaps holding up everybody else while they sort themselves out. And I would be much happier if a site of this size had at least one other vehicular access point.
Councillor Forresky.
Thank you, Chairman. I did want to take the opportunity this evening to keep quiet until I'd heard more views, but I don't hold much hope on this one not getting passed this evening because the precedence has been set with so many already before. But I do have several observations that I'd like to make because I feel as a member I owe it to the parish council and to residents to speak up for what I consider to be absolute madness. Why we are putting another 119 houses on a site that is remote, one of the most remote and unsustainable and out of keeping with the rest of the village, is absolutely beyond me. The phase that comes to mind, or the thought that comes to mind when I look at this, is get in there and get in quick. Why didn't we look at this when phase 1 came before us, and now we're looking at phase 2, which has come very quickly behind phase 1, and it's come in again as a full application, and there's nothing that inspires me in this that says it's different, it's unique, it embraces the character of Cranley at all. It's just like it's then taken from a catalogue of what's available, and yet it's just another 268 development in Cranley of new houses that is out in keeping with what's already there. My fellow councillors have already made the point very eloquently about all the other issues that remain linked to this site, but I think there's a great impact on the Downs link as well. I think a part of Cranley which is very historic and very beautiful and very meaningful and very purposeful for everyday people who use it as a pathway from one destination to another. It will have great impact on there. And I think, you might not be losing a tremendous amount of trees, but, it takes decades for trees to develop and grow and hours to slaughter them. And just to gain more access, it's just not thought through, it's quick, it's not in keeping, and I think to destroy what's been there for many, many years, we can't replace it. I could pick holes right through. I think the report is very thorough. I would commend the officers on a good report and say it is very thorough, but I could spend the evening just going over points which I disagree with over and over and over again. There is a saying out there at the moment, I'd like to take some merit in actually starting it, but we could do better. And before us again, we just have an application, it's same old, and we're actually adding to an estate that is currently under construction, that is so out of keeping, and we're making it worse. I know it's in the draft local plan, but as a parish council, I don't think we ever put it there in the first place, but I know I recognise it's there. But look at the access; it comes off phase 1. It's just a single. It's just going to go through phase 1. So I know the people who'll be buying those houses won't know any different. But again, we've got to think of the people around. Look at the volume of traffic that we're putting onto the highway. And I think, again, in this day and age, when we're looking at this before us, which is all singing, all dancing, and yet we cannot meet the space standard with some of these properties. It's just not good enough. It really, really isn't. If we're going to do it properly. This is just a repeat of what we've seen before. Adds nothing except more misery, more numbers, more same old, with no thought for the future. Chairman, I would like to leave it there for now, and I look forward to hearing what the rest of my fellow councillors has to say, but there's nothing in here that inspires me to want to say, yeah, brilliant, let's go for it. I'll just go back to the comment I made earlier. It was getting there, getting quick. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Holder.
Thank you, Chairman. I see that under our Waverley's local plan, Part 1, Strategic Policies and Sites, this site was allocated for the building of around 250 homes. 119 are being built on phase 1, so that makes phase 2 131, and yet the developer is proposing to build 149. My main concern is, as the pumping station was in phase 1 and presumably all the drainage designs and everything were in phase 1, were designed for the whole site to encompass 250 homes. And therefore, if we are going to build 268 homes, can the pumping station and cope with the extra homes that are being built?
Councillor?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Holder, the pumping station on phase 1 is designed to accommodate both phases, and Thames Water have confirmed that the higher figure of 268 would be provided for. Thank you.
Councillor Byrne. No. I beg your pardon. Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I hear what the Cranley members say, and I'm sympathetic with it. But we do have the technical advice that we begin, for example, on highways. I hear what people say about it would be better to have more than one access into this overall site. But we have an application with one, and the Highway Authority seem to be happy with it. They haven't raised an objection that this provides a hazard which shouldn't be, which does put one in a difficulty to argue that you know, highways are not met. And likewise with the water and sewage, we're advised that what is being proposed and what is nearly been totally agreed in detail, it will meet the demand, and that there will be no more water that comes out at the end of the day more than it would have been as it is at the moment. The one thing that I would just like further comment on is on pages 66, 65 through to 67, we do talk about the sort of whether it does meet or does not meet the standards. I can't understand with a large site like this and a lot of houses why those size standards can't be met. I mean, there seems to be about, I mean, yes, it largely meets, but I just can't understand why on page 66 there are, does not meet overall size, etc., twice. Why that should be, and why we should not insist that they all meet size. You know, in a big development like this, it's not as if we're trying to cramp, you know, properties into a small space, and why the officers feel that we should, I mean, they say broadly meets the recommended technical standard. Why don't we insist that it totally meets the technical standard?
Elizabeth Sims.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could answer that, Councillor Goodridge. Do understand members' reservations about these statistics that we provide you with. And I think over the last few months, even a couple of years, we've been having to give you the same advice. And I will repeat that tonight because I realise that we do consistently get concerns raised when there isn't total compliance with these standards. The government issued these technical standards a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, but made it absolutely clear that unless they were adopted through a local plan policy, we couldn't, or local planning authorities can't reasonably insist on total compliance. Now we're working towards, as you know, part 2 of the local plan, which will follow part 1 if part 1's adopted. And that will give the Council the opportunity to consider and consult on and adopt these standards as planning policy if that is your wish. But at the moment, they are guidance. They constitute a material consideration for you to take into account. But given that they don't yet constitute your policy, our guidance firmly is to you is to take it into account and consider if there is broad compliance, which I think our conclusion clearly is that there is, but where there are some small discrepancies, that the lack of complete compliance wouldn't, in our view, be reasonable for you to raise objection in relation to this in isolation. And that, of course, is the guidance, the response we've been giving you over the last couple of years. But the situation will improve. And if you do get to the point where you want to make that your policy, we will be in a much better position to say to applicants that we expect total compliance. But the divergence isn't huge in any instance. So I think the message I think you should take away is actually it is a good thing. It's not your policy yet, but the developer has actually made reference to it as closely as possible, and there is very broadly compliance with those standards. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. I think it's down to us eventually to make sure it's in part 2 of our local plan. Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 points. I'm sure I've spoken on it before. I know that many people also have. We have on the screen there a pedestrian access route onto the Horsham Road. I can't see why. We looked at it from a distance, so we didn't go over and inspect it. It looked as if it would be wide enough to have at least a single access track for emergency purposes only, perhaps. So could we ask, should we ask for that to be introduced as an emergency measure, not for day-to-day usage, but in an emergency, what happens? If we had accidents at the beginning of the road, entrance into the main entrance of the road, and then further damage or problems further into the site, emergency services and others wouldn't be able to get in, and others wouldn't be able to get out. So I think that bearing in mind we have a site which has access, and looking at that drawing, the map there, both properties either side of that drive are quite a long distance away from it, and therefore it wouldn't cause any great harm to them. So that's one point. Second point is the tree that is not considered to be worthy of keeping. How many people have been around Windsor Great Park or Estbury Gardens or many other places where they've got oak trees which are 300, 400, 500 years old, looking pretty poor in a way, surviving, and give a character to the area. They will not do away with them. Yet here we throw away a tree. Can you mark again the oak tree that we're talking about? I wish I'd gone across and seen it today, because that would have given me a better thought. But from here, yes, it may be damaged somewhere, but it's still a viable tree. It's not dying as far as I can see there. It's in full leaf in that photograph, and I think it should not be taken away.
Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to... This site here is above the phase 1 site. As you stand in the phase 1 site, you look up the hill to this site. And I agree that part of it is sheltered by that row of trees between the two. But I'm a bit concerned about the lighting that may be fitted to the roadways and open spaces in this part 2. We don't obviously want a large or array of light appearing on the top of this hillside. So I'm wondering if we could in fact add an addition to condition 19 to take into account the lighting when we're actually looking at the management plan, and ensure that it's not overbearing on the site below.
Thank you. Noted. Councillor Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Getting back to the sizes of the houses, if you look on the bottom of page 65, the thatch house, that is 9 square metres below the standard. And looking at that size, you'll have to go outside to change your mind. I think it's wholly unacceptable that such small dwellings can be submitted on an open piece of ground. More thought should be given to the design of these homes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. It was very interesting. I think she was called Miss Pritchard, who spoke on behalf of the applicant, actually said that the properties were designed to meet the local vernacular of Cranley. It's very interesting that I think we've seen some of these developments before, and as some of the names of the houses have cropped up before, I really don't believe that something called Wordsworth, Braxted or Sherwood was actually designed for Cranley. I really think that some of these developers need to have architects that are based locally and not just ones from, central London or something, because they are not designed for Cranley. And there are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 names of the house, 6 houses, plus the affordable in 200, in roughly 100 and whatever many houses it is. So they are. It is like, I hate to say it, like an old-fashioned council estate in a different way, because you've got 6 houses just dotted around wherever they want them to go, and we're here for design. If they said, I'm sorry, this is designed as a modern housing estate in the middle of the countryside, and we've chosen 6 houses plucked from our designs catalogue, and we've lumped them here, there and everywhere, and be honest about it, it would be better. But they are not designed for Cranley. I'm really sorry about that. Whilst other people are complaining about the overall, the size of the dwellings, actually I've got no problem with these ones, because all of them, apart from the 4-bed affordable, are private market housing. If you want to buy a house that's got 4 beds and one single one doesn't meet it, actually you're buying a 3-bedroomed house and one is a study. I live in a 16th century cottage and none of the rooms would meet any of the modern day, and it's been there for hundreds of years, and I'm happy with it, thank you. So, you know, they're private houses and one of them's going to be a study. And quite frankly, the lucky people who are on the social housing list who are going to get a 4-bedroomed house, I don't think they'll complain about the size of that 4th bedroom at all. But I have one big problem, and it's occurred for the last 3 years with these management companies that are going to go on and on and on, and looking after the open play, the LEAP, and the public open spaces. All I can say is that when Sainsbury, the Barrett housing estate was built in Liphook, which was 200 houses, all sorts of different sizes. It was a housing estate bang in the middle of the village. It had a children's play area, it had all sorts of other things. It had trees round the edge, and a management company was looking after them. Over the now 16 years, there is no play area because the people who live on them in there would not pay the public liability because they're public open spaces. So that means anybody, I can come in with my grandchild from Chiddingfold and rough around, play around on that LEAP. And somebody who's living on that estate, who's paying a management charge, is actually paying for the public liability. And it is really, really expensive. And after a while, they cancel it. They get closed down. The trees that the management company are looking after all around the bit, because the people who live in those houses have to pay to it. They gradually say, actually, I'll incorporate my garden in that bit and I'll look after, we'll have those trees. It's been done. You've only got to look at the Barrett housing estate, and over there, you actually have got no control forever on these sites. It's up to the management company and what they do. So our hands are tied, but if people were honest and said, it's a modern housing estate, we hope it'll be all right. The sewage, we hope it's all right, we hope it's all right, but my hands are tied. I'm really sad for Cranley and Orfold. It's just awful, but I'm sorry, it is what it is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stone. Welcome back.
Thank you, Chairman. A question for the officers. In your calculations for the sewerage, can you please confirm to me that the capacity you're talking about includes the railway line of drains under the ground to the houses? Because I seem to recall on the last phase that to get the calculation through for the sewerage, it included all the pipework and drain system. I'm assuming this is the same, so you're including the drains, which would mean in a flood situation and them having to cut that pump off and not work, would mean sewerage not flushing from the toilets and coming up into the pans in the houses, which should be rather nice, but in a 36-hour flood, I don't think it would appeal to me. So can you just confirm that point, that you are including in your calculations the pipework under the ground as capacity? Thank you.
Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Stennett, it is the pipework would be included in that calculation. The actual capacity for storage actually exceeds the required capacity. So I think it's 88 cubic metres of storage required, and there'll be something like 104 cubic metres proposed. Thank you, Chairman.
Please do.
For my colleagues around the table here, 88 cubic metres is about 7 or 8 normal 32-tonne tipper loads, which is nothing.
And in a rain flood situation, that would fill in minutes. And it's, in my opinion, unacceptable. And we've got the same old thing here, too many houses, too greedy on the development, and not enough money going into infrastructure. Thank you.
Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Yet again, we find ourselves boxed in, don't we? I mean, it's in the draft local plan, housing to this extent, or broadly to this extent on this side. We've got assurances from the statutory consultees, some of which we frankly don't believe. And this is a problem I think we have, particularly in this area. We know there are gross deficiencies in the current sewage and drainage systems in Cranley, and yet Thames come back and swear black and blue that it is fine, it's going to be fine, and they'll provide the detail in the future. Except in planning terms, there's very little we can do about that, but it doesn't actually give us a huge amount of reassurance as to what is going on. And I just hope that if we are eventually end up approving this, we in Waverley have sufficient technical expertise to properly assess their detailed proposals when they come forward, because that is going to be the issue. If they come forward with proposals which we can't properly assess, then we have, and our future residents of these areas have got a problem. Now, I know that's not a planning issue. I accept that, Chairman, and I accept we are where we are. Our statutory consultees have given the nod, and reluctantly, we have to accept it in planning terms. It's not sustainable to argue against it on those bases, so we have to acknowledge it. But I just fire a shot of warning that some expertise around here is somewhat sceptical about Thames's performance. Historic and potential in the future, but I'll leave that be. I think the other thing is disappointing to see that construction work's already started on this site. There's a great big road right the way through it with deep hard standing and surfaced, and clearly a fair amount of work has already gone on to create that. Now, I don't know whether specific approval is being given separately for that, but as I read the conditions, they're supposed to approve. We as a planning authority, if we were to give approval, are supposed to agree to all that before any work takes place. So I was somewhat surprised to see the extent of that construction, because it is a pretty solid construction. I acknowledge it. If we give them approval, it would be necessary, but they have, to my mind, jumped the gun. The other thing, when you actually look at the housing, and I'm disappointed that we haven't met these indicative standards, but when you actually look at it, you can see what's happened. The large houses in the market sizes have got over 50% greater area in them than the minimum specified. So clearly the developer is looking to seek a significant premium on the larger houses to fund the development. I think it's a shame that they haven't spread that out a bit more evenly. If you look on page 67, for example, you can see the 4-bedroom houses are being shown to providing 160 odd square metres, where the minimum is 106. So it tells you something about the sort of the properties that are going to be built there. And the same with the 5-bedroom house, again, providing 194 square metres, and the minimum standard is 128. So those are going to be premium properties to fund the thing. Having said all that, and sympathising with our colleagues in Cranley, I personally find it difficult to see objections to this application which are really sustainable when it comes to a potential appeal if we were to refuse it. I think it's disappointing the developer hasn't worked more closely with the local parish council. I think we've seen again in the past where the developers take the time and trouble to work really closely with the local community. Better arrangements are made. And I would like, again, to suggest somewhere or other we could encourage the developer, even at this late stage, in finalising the details which are going to would be submitted, to be working closely in conjunction with the parish council to produce the features and the details which the Parish Council would agree would be more sympathetic to what goes on in the neighbourhood. And I make a plea for that. Every time we see a developer working closely with the local community, we get a decent scheme. Every time we don't, we get, understandably, the local community being really concerned about what is being done in their name. And I would make a plea that we, even as an informative somewhere, we actually encourage the developer to get really close to the local community in executing this work. But reluctantly, at this stage, I feel I've probably really no option but to support the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I was just thinking of Badshot Lee and Farnham was a classic example of cooperation right from word go. Just turn to Elizabeth Sims, I think, on the Hall Road. Okay, Catherine, sorry. I do beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chairman. I think there are just a couple of questions there that have come out of the debate that I'll try and answer for members now. So firstly, with regards to the Hall Road, obviously it is a substantial road. It was actually approved as part of the construction management plan for phase 1 to allow them to take materials through to the other side of the site, and is proposed to be removed at the completion of phase 1. Obviously, if phase 2 is approved, then the road will remain there. So that answers your question, I hope, about the Hall Road. There was a question, I think, from Councillor Denis with regards to parking space provision for the 3-bed units. When we look at parking, we look to the guidelines. The guidelines incorporate an element of visitor parking. The allocation of that parking is something that we have the discretion over. What I would say about this development is that there is quite a lot of parking available on the estate roads throughout the development in order to allow people to have the opportunity to park and to prevent uncontrolled parking, which is obviously inconsiderate and generally harmful to the overall sort of appearance and use of those areas by residents. So overall, the amount actually exceeds the parking guidelines. I appreciate your point with regards to how it is divvied up, though. Councillor Adams, you raised the query about lighting. I've actually just had another quick look. If I can just turn your attention to condition 16 in your agenda, which is on bottom of page 96. The lighting condition there, we have actually specified that it should comply with the recommendation of the Bat Conservation Trust's guidance. So that would actually require them to submit that in accordance with the guidance to ensure that there's no harms to bat foraging routes, etc. on the site. The final point that was discussed was the issue of the secondary access. Obviously, members need to be mindful of the advice of the Highway Authority. They are satisfied that it is safe to serve the development and is satisfied that it is safe in an emergency situation. What I would say with regards to providing a secondary access along the pathway, that is a treed, quite heavily treed track. It's not really a made track at this point. If I just show you the photograph again. Obviously the trees on the right hand side, that is the boundary of the extent of the applicant's ownership. So there's also the issue with the ancient woodland at the top at the junction with Horsham Road. The pathway that is proposed would be of a no-dig construction. I think it may be difficult and rather onerous on the applicant to require them to provide a secondary access, given that the County Highway Authority is satisfied in their comment that the singular access is acceptable, and also having regards to the constraints of that area with regards to actually physically constructing a more substantial access road through there. I hope that mops up the rest of the questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine, indeed. I feel another email coming on to the Chief Executive. The webcast is stuck on Councillor Band, as he is now seen. Yet again, it's stuck. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I won't repeat what they said. I agree, say 100% with what Councillor Stennis and Councillor Band have said about this development. We are boxed in. We can't fail it on the space standards. The statutory consultees say anything goes, it seems. It really doesn't matter how people design developments these days. I think the statutory consultees, who pays the piper calls the tune, and they're paid by the government, it seems. But it is too late, I think, for us in this development. Phase 1 set the principle. I agree with Councillor Band. I don't really think that there's any good planning reasons that we can use that would stand up against an inspector. It's certainly less than ideal, as a number of councillors spoke earlier on in respect of the lots of flaws in the scheme, but I can see no law against it. I'd like some clarification, if I may, on 3 particular points, though. The first one, well, the points are infiltration, sewerage, and affordable housing. Take those in order. In respect of the SUDs and infiltration, Catherine, in her introduction, told us that there would be infiltration through permeable paving. I may have got this wrong, but I'd understood that infiltration testing hadn't been done. It had been assumed that there wasn't, that the clay is not suitable for infiltration suds, and that what we were having beneath the paving and the roads was in effect a gravel or whatever conduit by which surface water would be drained off eventually to the brook. So if you can clarify on that, whether there will be infiltration suds, as we were told in the introduction, or whether in fact there hasn't been any infiltration rate testing done, and there won't be. So that's the first issue. Because obviously, you know, there's another issue there. If we are relying on infiltration testing, and that's going to be tested, has it been picked up in conditions? Because I didn't notice it there, but I could be wrong. There's a lot of paperwork in front of me. Second issue is in respect of sewerage. I appreciate that condition 11 does hopefully capture as a Grampian condition any off-site works that are necessary, but you know, there must be concerns, as other more local councillors who know the particular problems of Cranley and Allfold. There is a problem. This could overburden the treatment plant. We are told that we are going to trust that the management company will do any pumping off peak. I don't know what that means. I don't know whether that's just words that have been put in to try and keep us happy tonight. If there's off-peak pumping, well, when is peak excrement? I know about peak oil and things like that. Is it just when we come to these meetings? Is there a peak excrement? Does everybody poo at the same time? Or certain times of day? Certainly not during the rush hour, I'd hope, because they're meant to be in their cars at that time. So I'd like to know when about this is going to be pumping, and you know, whether there's a reality to this, or whether it's just made up as we go along. The last point really is a matter of damage limitation. One of the main benefits of this development is the affordable housing. Obviously, the delivery of housing is a benefit to the whole of the borough. The affordable housing element, though, I seem to have a couple of different definitions. I noticed in the document which was emailed and came through the post very kindly from Crest Nicholson, they state on the front page in the summary of the Phase 2 proposals, it says that there'll be 36 affordable homes made up of shared ownership and affordable rent. Now, the first page of our update, wherever that was, at the top of it, it says affordable housing. It says there'll be 18 shared ownership units and 18 social rented units. I'm very much in favour of, myself, I assume a definition of social rented units to be around council housing rent levels and affordable housing to be, these days, around 80% of the market levels, and there could be a very big difference between the two. My concern is that we know that Cresta removed rented from East Street development after, was it 13, 14 years of promising us that there would be rented, social rented in there. That was removed. I want to make sure that doesn't happen to this. Similarly, the recommendation, the amended recommendation at the end of our update sheet simply states, and it's about, I think, 2/3 of the way through it somewhere, it says provision of 30% affordable housing. Well, that could change to all being part ownership, couldn't it, if we have it in those terms? So I was wondering whether if another member would like to indicate that their support, I would be happy to second or propose that that provision of 30% affordable housing be made a lot more concrete by stating the numbers and stating social rented, because that's what the beginning of this update sheet tells us. It's going to have 18 social rented units. So I appreciate the, you know, one of the main points of this development is it brings us quite a lot of social housing or affordable housing. There's 40% in the first phase and 30% in this, but we want to make sure that's secured. So if you could cover those three issues, and if anyone else would like to perhaps propose that we solidify that to make sure that we do have social rented in with the scheme. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much. There is one question also, and that was raised by somebody earlier on about levels of the first phase development. I think at the briefing I understood that we had total faith in what has been delivered. Jeanette, I think, has got the answer to that one.
The response to that query obviously is not related in any way whatsoever to the determination of this planning application. What we have done is we have had a surveyor look at those levels. We've had a discussion with Councillor Townsend. We're confident, actually, we are very confident that those levels are as approved, and we have offered to meet with Councillor Townsend again, and also to meet with the residents if we need to, in order to go through the details of all of those levels on site.
Thank you, Jeanette. And do you want to come back now on
yes, if I can just address Councillor Hyman's questions. With regards to infiltration, there are very small pockets of permeable paving proposed. The main SUDs will rely on the attenuation ponds and the underground cell storage, so there will be some limited infiltration. With regards to peak flow, I'm afraid I don't know when peak flow times are. That would be a matter for the sewerage undertaker to control and determine. And finally, the issue with regards to the affordable housing, I can confirm that they would be social rent, for social rent, rather than affordable rent. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And two people speak again. Councillor Dinas.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I just want to go back to the sizes of the houses, and I think Mr. Sims said there's broad compliance, I think was the word you used, and you said it can be a material consideration. Looking at the figures, we've got 119 houses, 22 failed to meet the standard. It appears that an additional 28 failed to meet it with one size of room or another, which actually means out of 119, I think only 69 comply with it completely. And I can just go to a comment of Councillor James, and I don't normally disagree, but I just slightly disagree with one comment you made, and you said about a 4-bedroom house, an affordable 4-bedroom house. I would say if somebody needs a 4-bedroom house, it's because they need it, not because they want 3 bedrooms and a study. You know, there are people in affordable houses, I know from my own experience locally, that have quite large number of children, and when they need 4 bedrooms, they actually do need 4 bedrooms. I know the point you were trying to make, but I think a 4-bedroom affordable housing would be, there'd be a lot of people who would need that. So saying one of the bedrooms is more like a study, which I think it is, actually is wrong. So I go back, only 69 out of 119 meet the standards completely. I accept everything about it's not in legislation, it's not in planning, but we want people to live, you know, we talk about health and well-being of people who live in these properties. And actually, if they've got rooms and bedrooms that aren't big enough, are we really doing that? So 69 out of 119, I don't think it's acceptable. Thank you for letting me come back, Chair.
Councillor Holder.
Thank you for allowing me to come back, Chairman. I tend to agree with my fellow councillors that I think there are too many houses on this particular plot. It does strike me that, as Councillor James has pointed out, these designs have been taken out of a catalogue from some office in London, and that they haven't consulted with Cranley Parish Council as to the design. And if you turn to page 57, paragraph 64 of the NPPF states that permission should be refused for development of poor design that fails to take opportunities available for improving the character and quality of an area. And if the developer had taken the trouble of consulting with Cranley Parish Council and designing better houses and slightly less of them, then I wouldn't have an objection. But I do think this site can probably take 100 houses, but I'm afraid I don't think it should take 119. Thank you.
Councillor Forrest.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to come back. I think it's a really sad day, I really, really do, that we've spoke at length about some of the reasons we shouldn't be supporting this, but the constraints allow us differently. But I do think, as members, we have a responsibility to discharge our duties correctly, and I think there are plenty of opportunities within the report to suggest that this isn't acceptable. It would appear, and I think as a council we have to send out a very strong message, and I agree with Councillor Hyman that, you know, the problems that we're seeing, by the time it comes to part 2 of the local plan, it's too late. It's going to be too late, because Cranley will have had its proportion built on, or work underway, or permissions granted, and there'll be nothing left then in part 2 which will impact strongly. It would seem to me that, you know, that there's no regard for quality, there's no regard for the parish council, there's no regard for officers talking to all members of the parish, all members of the ward, because there are 5 of us in there. And there's no regard for wildlife, there's no regard for local people, there's no regard for local amenity. And we're heading into a real period of unknown, because we don't know the outcome of all these management companies. We don't know the result of how this is going to pan out in the years in the future to come. And I think we've got an opportunity here this evening that if we have a report in front of us that I don't believe sets out all the detail we need to be able to make informed choice, I think there was missed opportunities here when they could have spoken to the parish council in depth about its design statement and what it's looking for. And I look at the figures quoted in the 106 agreement, and, you know, I'm chairman of the parish council. They've never come and sat down and talked to us as a parish council and said, what do you want? Is this what you want? And is this the way you go forward? So I have very little confidence in setting up or going forward where the developers work. It's an opportunity for them, but I think it's an opportunity more for us here this evening to shape the future and shape other parts of the borough who aren't as badly affected, because again, it's another greenfield, another loss of trees, another application. We've said everything that's wrong, and yet we're about to pass it. What Councillor Stennett said, his last remarks said it all, and I'd ask you to urge and really consider what you were about to do, because you do have an opportunity, and we shouldn't be constrained by something that we feel is a material planning consideration when we've discussed all that's before us that's wrong about it, not what's right about it. And it could be that actually it's deferred, and we relook at some of these other things, but it's a bit late in the day for that one. But Thank you, Chairman. I'm really passionate about doing the right thing, and I would be wrong and not discharging my duties if I didn't say how I felt on behalf of the people of Cranley and the Parish Council. We've made it clear we've been very unfairly treated with the number of allocations, and all we've ever asked for is if you're going to do it right. And on this occasion, yet again, we've been asked to accept something that is not the standard that I think Cranley residents deserve. Thank you for allowing me to come back, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Munner, and then I'll ask for Councillor Ellis and Townsend.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for the second question, really. Taking on a comment of Councillor Hyman, are we actually guaranteed that half of the 36 will be social rented, or could that proportion be changed by the developer later?
Thank you, Chairman. The affordable housing mix, particularly the 10-year mix, will be secured in the 106 agreement. I do caveat that in that there is in our standard template a clause which does allow for the 10-year mix to be changed, but only on the agreement of the council, and that is usually a conversation a developer will have with the housing team, and it will revolve around viability issues that the developer may have. So there is a circumstance in which the 10-year mix can be changed, but it would have to be done with our agreement and by a formal deed of variation.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to come back, and thank you for my fellow members for their informed debate on this site. This is a strategic site, but it was only a strategic site for 101 dwellings. Perhaps if the developer had stuck to that number, the houses could have been of a better technical size, standard size. It is a full application, as we know, and because of that, the water supply and the sewage details should be more, the details of them should be known. My real worry is that the delay in providing these details may be that perhaps the details would not be so palatable to members if they knew them. I think the members should know them. If it does result in a huge extra tank of foul water having to put on this site or being put off site somewhere, then I'm not sure that members would be wanting to approve this application. And I note the thing about the comments about the houses and the, one bedroom being of a small size, but surely if they're not full-size bedrooms, then they don't meet the SHMA requirements either. That's all I've got to say at this moment. And as I would just echo Councillor Forazeski's comment that this standard is not really what Cranley residents deserve. Thank you.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. And I too thank all of my colleagues for their serious and careful consideration of this application. There is so little, very little to my mind to recommend this application, and I share the concerns about many aspects that have been addressed today, particularly the size of houses, of the properties, the failure to meet the standard of many of the properties. We are talking about families living in these properties, sharing lives where they should have room to eat together and to have some form of family life. And I'm sorry, I don't feel there's very much at all to recommend the application, and I urge my colleagues to refuse it. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I move to the recommendation, do the officers wish to make any further comment? Elizabeth? Jeanette?
Just before you vote, councillors, I just want to remind you again, this is a strategic allocation in the emerging part 1 of the local plan, and you can give that allocation considerable weight. In terms of the design comments that have been made, again, I would just draw your attention to the fact that phase 1 has obviously been granted and is under construction, and the design detailing is similar. In terms of the issues with respect to sewerage in particular, please, I would urge you to take note of what the report says in relation to that issue. The approvals in principle have been granted by Thames Water, and those are not matters which are in your jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We move to the recommendation. Recommendation A is that, subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement to secure appropriate contributions in respect of highway safety, capacity improvements, a travel voucher scheme, early years and primary education, recycling containers, arts and leisure improvements towards Cranley Arts Centre, leisure and recreation sports pitch provision at Snoxhall Fields and a new MUGA, multi-use games area, environmental improvements to public bridleway between Snoxhall Pavilion and Snoxhall Field, car park, provision of an on-site leap and laps, off-site highways works, provision of 30% affordable housing, the setting up of a management company for open space, play space, landscaping, footpath and cycle links, and SUDS, conditions 1 to 20, no, not quite sure. The conditions 1, 3 to 7, 9 to 13, 15 to 18, 21 to 24, 26, 28, 29 on the agenda report, and conditions 2, 8, 14, 19, 20, 25 and 27 as listed in the update sheet and informatives, 1 to 22 on the agenda report. Permission be granted. Those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Abstentions?
Should be 2.
Thank you very much indeed. So, recommendation B, that in the event of a Section 106 agreement is not completed within 6 months of the date of the resolution to grant planning permission, then permission be refused. Those in favour of recommendation B, please show.
That's unanimous.
Thank you very much indeed. That concludes our meeting. Thank you all very much indeed.
It's fine. Brilliant.